The message arrived on a quiet Sunday afternoon, and at first it felt like nothing more than a small interruption in an ordinary day, but in truth it was the moment everything began to shift beneath Emily Parker's carefully balanced life, because Emily was not expecting the past to reach out to her, not now, not after so many years of calm routines and settled choices. She was standing in her living room, folding warm laundry straight from the dryer, the late afternoon sunlight falling softly across the wooden floor, the house peaceful in a way that had once felt comforting and now felt almost too quiet. Her husband Daniel was upstairs on a work call, his voice faint through the ceiling, confident and familiar, a sound that represented the life she had chosen and built with care. Emily's phone buzzed on the coffee table, and she glanced at it without much thought, expecting a delivery update or a message from a friend, but when she saw the name attached to the message, her breath caught so sharply it felt like the air had left her lungs. The name was Luke Harris. For a long second, she simply stared, her fingers still gripping a towel, her heart suddenly beating faster for reasons she did not want to examine too closely. Luke was not someone she thought about often, not deliberately, yet the moment she saw his name, memories rose without permission, clear and vivid, like a door opening in her mind that she had never truly locked. Luke was Daniel's childhood friend, someone who had been part of Daniel's life long before Emily entered it, and yet, strangely, Luke had become woven into her own story during those early years when everything felt new and uncertain. She remembered meeting him for the first time at a small summer gathering years ago, how he had been quieter than Daniel, more observant, how he listened as if every word mattered, and how, without intending to, she had felt understood in a way that surprised her. Luke had never crossed a line, never said anything inappropriate, never done anything wrong, and yet there had always been a quiet tension, a sense that something meaningful existed just below the surface, unspoken and unresolved. Emily had chosen not to look too closely at it back then, telling herself it was harmless, telling herself she loved Daniel and that was enough, and when Luke moved away suddenly after college, disappearing from their lives with only a brief goodbye, she had accepted it as part of growing up, part of life moving forward. Over time, the memory of him faded into the background of her mind, not gone but distant, softened by years of marriage, shared responsibilities, and the steady rhythm of adult life. Now, staring at the phone, she realized how fragile that distance truly was. The message itself was simple, almost careful in its wording, but it carried weight far beyond its few words. "Hi Emily. I don't know if you remember me. It's Luke." She did remember, of course she did, and that realization alone unsettled her more than the message itself. Emily felt a wave of hesitation wash over her, a quiet internal debate about whether responding was wise or necessary, because replying meant acknowledging something she had long convinced herself no longer mattered. She told herself that ignoring it would be the sensible choice, that her life was stable and good and did not need old emotions stirred up without reason, but curiosity crept in, joined by a softer feeling she didn't want to name, and before she could stop herself, she typed a polite response, careful and controlled, asking if everything was okay. The reply came quickly, almost as if Luke had been waiting, and when she read his words, a strange heaviness settled in her chest. He was back in town, he said, and he hadn't planned to reach out, but some things did not stay buried. That sentence echoed in her mind long after she locked her phone and set it down, her hands trembling slightly as she leaned back against the couch, because she understood exactly what he meant, even if neither of them had said it aloud. The past had a way of waiting patiently, of staying quiet until the moment you least expected it, and Emily suddenly felt as though something she had carefully packed away had been reopened without her consent. She glanced toward the staircase, listening to Daniel's laughter upstairs, and guilt flickered through her, sharp and uncomfortable, because she hadn't done anything wrong, and yet she already felt like she was standing on uncertain ground. She tried to focus on the present, on the life she had built, reminding herself of the years she and Daniel had spent together, the challenges they had faced, the love that had grown steady and familiar, but even as she told herself these things, her thoughts drifted back to Luke, to the way he had looked at her years ago as if he saw something she rarely showed anyone, to the conversations that had lingered in her mind long after they ended. Emily didn't know why Luke had reached out now, what he wanted, or what this sudden return would mean, but she knew, with a quiet certainty that unsettled her, that this message was not just a casual greeting, and as the afternoon light slowly faded and the house filled with evening shadows, Emily felt the weight of an unspoken question settle into her heart, one that had nothing to do with the past alone and everything to do with who she was now, because sometimes the most powerful moments begin not with dramatic events, but with a single message that reminds you of who you once were and forces you to wonder how much of that person still lives inside you. That night, Emily lay awake beside Daniel, staring into the dark as the quiet house seemed louder than ever, because her mind would not slow down and Luke's message kept replaying in her thoughts with an intensity she had not expected, bringing back moments she believed time had softened. Daniel slept peacefully next to her, his breathing steady, his presence familiar and safe, yet Emily felt a distance she could not explain, as if her thoughts were somewhere else entirely, standing in memories she had never fully faced. She remembered the last day she had seen Luke years ago, the way autumn leaves had scattered across the road, the way he had looked at her as if he wanted to say something important but chose silence instead, and she realized now that silence had followed her longer than she admitted. When morning came, her phone buzzed again, and before she even picked it up, she knew who it would be, her heart reacting faster than her mind. Luke's message was gentle but heavy with meaning, telling her he never forgot the way things felt back then, and Emily closed her eyes as she read it, because the truth in his words stirred something deep and unresolved inside her. She reminded herself she was married, that her life was built on real choices and shared years, and she responded carefully, setting a clear boundary, telling him that the past was long gone and that her present mattered. Luke's reply came with respect, not pressure, not expectation, and that made it harder, not easier, because he was not asking for anything, only acknowledging what once existed. Days passed, yet the feeling did not fade, and when Emily unexpectedly saw Luke at a small coffee shop near downtown, her breath caught in surprise, even though she told herself it was coincidence. He looked older, more settled, but the calm intensity in his eyes was still there, and as they exchanged polite words, the years between them seemed to shrink in quiet ways that unsettled her. Their conversation stayed safe, focused on work, on life, on how strange it felt to stand there after so long, but beneath every sentence ran a deeper current, a shared understanding that neither of them named. Luke told her he was glad she seemed happy, and Emily smiled in response, yet the word happiness echoed strangely in her chest, because she was content, she was stable, but she was no longer sure if that was the same thing. Driving home, Emily felt a mix of guilt and warmth, knowing she had not crossed any line and yet feeling as though something important had been stirred awake, something she had ignored for years while focusing on being a good partner and building a responsible life. She began to notice small things she had overlooked before, the way Daniel seemed distracted by work, the way conversations ended quickly, not from lack of care but from routine, and she wondered when comfort had quietly replaced curiosity between them. Luke's questions lingered in her mind, simple questions about dreams and choices, about whether she ever wondered who she might have been if life had unfolded differently, and though she never answered them aloud, they followed her through her days, through grocery aisles and evening walks, through moments that should have felt ordinary but now felt slightly unbalanced. Emily tried to remind herself that wondering was not the same as wanting, that memory was not the same as action, and that love was built on commitment, not possibility, yet even as she held on to those truths, she sensed that something had shifted inside her, not toward Luke, but toward a deeper awareness of herself. By the end of the week, Emily understood that this was not about choosing between two men, but about facing a part of her past she had never fully acknowledged, and as she stood in her kitchen one evening watching the sky darken beyond the window, she felt a quiet tension settle into her heart, knowing that once old emotions resurface, they rarely disappear without asking something in return. The tension in Emily's life did not explode in a dramatic way but instead tightened slowly, shaping her thoughts and emotions until even small moments carried weight, and she found herself moving through her days with a careful awareness she had never needed before. She continued her routines, shared meals with Daniel, answered work emails, smiled at neighbors, yet beneath all of it ran a quiet current of uncertainty that she could not ignore. Luke did not message often, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and restrained, never crossing boundaries, never asking for more than conversation, and somehow that restraint made everything feel more intense, because there was no clear wrong to point to, no obvious reason to push the feeling away. Emily began noticing details in her marriage she had once accepted without question, the way Daniel listened but rarely asked deeper questions, the way their evenings ended early, comfortable but predictable, and she wondered when effort had quietly turned into habit. Then one evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, Daniel mentioned Luke casually, his tone calm but his eyes focused, and Emily felt a sudden tightness in her chest even before he finished speaking. Daniel told her he had run into Luke earlier that week and that Luke had admitted reaching out to her, not as a confession or challenge, but as an act of honesty, and Emily realized in that moment that whatever she was feeling was no longer hers alone to carry. When Daniel continued, explaining that Luke had shared the real reason he left town years ago, Emily felt as if the room had shifted, because she had never known there was a reason beyond distance and opportunity. Daniel said Luke had loved her back then, quietly and deeply, and had chosen to walk away rather than risk harming their friendship or her relationship, and the words settled heavily between them, changing the shape of old memories in an instant. Emily felt tears rise, not from guilt or regret, but from understanding, because she finally saw the full picture of what had been left unsaid, and she realized that Luke's silence had been a form of sacrifice she had never recognized. Daniel did not accuse or raise his voice, and that calm hurt more than anger might have, because it showed his trust and his pain at the same time, and when he told her that he had always sensed something but chose to believe in her, Emily felt a deep ache in her chest. She told Daniel she had never known, that she had never acted on anything, and he listened, his expression serious but open, and in that quiet exchange, Emily understood that truth, even when painful, could also be grounding. That night, Emily lay awake again, but this time her thoughts were clearer, because the mystery that had followed her for years finally had a shape, and with it came a strange sense of relief mixed with sadness. She realized that the pull she felt toward Luke was not about wanting a different life, but about honoring a moment of emotional honesty that had never been given space before. In the days that followed, Emily felt steadier, because the unknown had become known, and though the emotions were still there, they no longer felt like a threat, but like a chapter that needed to be acknowledged before it could close. She understood now that love was not always loud or demanding, that sometimes it existed in choices not made, in paths deliberately left unexplored, and that realization reshaped the way she viewed her past and her present. Emily knew there would need to be a final conversation, not to reopen wounds, but to allow all three of them to move forward without unanswered questions, and as she prepared herself for that moment, she felt a quiet strength settle in, because facing the truth, however uncomfortable, had given her clarity she did not know she was missing. Emily met Luke on a cool afternoon in a quiet public park, choosing an open space filled with people and moving air, because this meeting was not about secrecy or emotion running out of control, but about closure and honesty, and as she walked toward the bench where Luke was waiting, she felt calm in a way that surprised her. Luke stood when he saw her, offering a polite smile that carried both warmth and acceptance, and after they sat down, there was no awkward silence, only a shared understanding that this was their final chapter. Emily spoke first, telling him she knew everything now, that Daniel had been honest with her, and Luke nodded without hesitation, confirming that he had always believed truth mattered more than comfort. Emily told him that what they had felt years ago was real and meaningful, but it belonged to a different time and could not define her present, and Luke listened carefully, never interrupting, his expression peaceful rather than regretful. He admitted that reaching out had not been about changing her life, but about letting go of something he had carried quietly for too long, and Emily understood that this meeting was as much for him as it was for her. They spoke about growth, about choices, about how love sometimes shows itself not through action, but through restraint and respect, and as the conversation continued, Emily felt the weight she had been carrying slowly lift. There was no dramatic confession, no lingering touch, no emotional outburst, only clarity, and when they stood to leave, they wished each other well with sincerity, knowing this goodbye was different from the last one, because it was complete. Emily drove home with a steady heart, no longer pulled in two directions, and when she reached the house, Daniel was there waiting, the familiar space feeling warmer than it had in weeks. She told him about the meeting without hesitation, sharing every important detail, and Daniel listened, relief softening his expression as he realized the uncertainty had finally passed. Emily told him she chose their life together, not out of habit or obligation, but with clear intention, and when she said it, she felt the truth of it settle deeply within her. Daniel held her, not tightly, but with quiet assurance, and in that moment, Emily understood that commitment was not the absence of doubt, but the decision to face it honestly and still stay. In the days that followed, Luke moved on again, this time without unresolved feelings, and Emily felt no pull to look back, because the past no longer held unanswered questions. Life returned to its routines, but the routines felt lighter, more intentional, and Emily found herself more present, more engaged, and more open with Daniel than she had been in years. She realized that the shocking part of the story was not that the past returned, but that it left her stronger once she faced it, and the emotional ending was not about loss or regret, but about understanding that love built on honesty and choice could endure even when tested by memories. And as autumn turned toward winter, Emily felt certain that while the past had knocked loudly on her door, it no longer had the power to enter, because she had finally learned how to let it go.